Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Eating Disorder Hope webinar in conjunction with Timberline Knolls Residential Treatment Center. We're delighted that you've joined us for this presentation on how yoga can ease the symptoms of trauma in eating disorder recovery, featuring our special guest and presenter, Rachel Sherron, who is a Clinical Development Institute, who is a staff member at the Timberline Knolls Clinical Development Institute. She is also the former coordinator of trauma awareness and clinical yoga specialist at Timberline Knolls. So welcome, Rachel. Just a couple things to point out to all our attendees who are with us tonight. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to Rachel, and you can do that via the questions pane of your control panel. When Rachel has concluded her presentation, we will be reading your questions out loud to Rachel to give her the opportunity to address those. You can also find a copy of Rachel's PowerPoint in the handout section of your control panel. And without further ado, I will now transition this over to Rachel.
Great, thank you so much, and welcome everybody, wherever you are out in the world right now. Thank you for tuning in and listening. And I'm going to start right off with just a few moments here of a simple guided meditation, and I invite you to please take part in this. So wherever you are, as long as you're not driving a car right now, if you could just sort of maybe set any notes or pens or anything distracting aside, and this will just be a few minutes. So whenever you're ready, you can just gently either allow your eyes to close, or maybe just start to gaze downward slightly and steady your eyes softly at one point below you. So either eyes closed or steadying your gaze downward. And I want you to just kind of feel yourself arriving or landing into the present moment. Really noticing what that is like, what that transition of just getting present, tuning inward a bit feels like for you tonight. And as you do this, we're going to look at a few different layers of our being. Few different layers of who we are. And the first layer of this is our body. So I want you to just begin to notice your body, and you can do this by simply noticing how you're seated. Feeling what you're sitting on. Noticing if your legs and feet are down on the ground or if they're up in a seat with you. Feeling your sit bones and your seat below you making contact with either a chair or the floor. And then just noticing the spine, noticing if the spine feels tall or if there's some slouching. And then just taking a moment here and observing any sensations, tingling, tightness, or tension anywhere in the body. And then now just gently begin to guide your awareness more towards your breathing. Feel that your body is breathing. And just gather any information about the breath, whether it feels long or short. If it feels rough or smooth. Maybe you notice a gentle rise in the chest on the inhale. The chest falls a bit on the exhale. Just notice the breath for one more moment. Then gently shift your awareness into your mind. Just take a moment and check in with what type of thoughts, what activity you have going on in the mind. Whether your mind is distracted or racing, or maybe you just notice that you're present, observing. And then from here, I want you to just gently check in with this part of yourself that is observing all of these things. So how, as you listen to my voice guiding you into this meditation, that you just kind of know what to do. You know how to observe the body. You know how to watch the breath. There's this part of you that is able to observe the activity of the mind. So just kind of observe that. Observe the observer. And let's just take one more gentle breath in and long breath out. And if your eyes are closed, you can slowly let them open. If they're gazing down, you can lift them back up towards your screen. Okay, so this simple meditation is something that I always like to start with when I'm asking clients to start to become more aware of their present moment, or to start to become more aware of their self. And the map that I used for this meditation is a map of the 5 layers of our being, as stated in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is a very, very ancient, one of the original texts of yoga. And this sage Patanjali mapped out these 5 layers of who we are, and they're called the koshas. The Kosha Model is what you might hear, or the Panchamaya model is another way that you might hear it. And we went into 4 of these layers. I asked you to check in with your body, your breath, the mind, and the emotions. And then there's the witnessing layer, the observer. And then the 5th layer is the layer of the self, capital S. This layer, you'll see it that it goes by many different names. Self is one, kind of the bliss layer is one. This is that area that's really hard to put into words that make sense. It's a feeling of being connected to your true source, a feeling of being connected to something greater or higher, a higher level of thought, higher awareness. Okay, so our 5 koshas are body, breath, mind and emotions, witnessing, and then self. And this is kind of what we'll look at as we move through this evening's discussion on trauma and eating disorders. So I think that when we are engaging in traditional talk therapy, either as a client or as a clinician, traditional talk therapy does a really, really amazing job at really looking at our mind and our emotions. Traditional talk therapy really helps us to understand any emotional patterns, any habitual thinking that happens. It can help us to reframe, to think about things in a different way, and that can be really wonderful. But I find that what using other modalities, maybe like a more somatically based therapy, let's say something like somatic experiencing or sensory motor psychotherapy, some forms of dance movement therapy. So any of these therapies that are bringing the body more into the conversation really fills in this Kosha model a little bit more fully than traditional talk therapy. So somatic therapies are going to ask clients to be present to the body, the breath, to observe the mind, and to be able to witness or observe themselves. And then there's yoga therapy or yoga psychotherapy, or you might hear it called yoga-informed psychotherapy, which really does add in that 5th layer. I think it's the really unique and special part of what yoga does. It's also the part that is very hard to measure. You know, we can, in our field, we can measure symptoms, whether they're increasing or decreasing. Clients can get some biofeedback and measure how deep or how shallow they're breathing. But it's a difficult thing with yoga, because what yoga often does is all of these things quiet and get really peaceful, and then we get to connect to this really deep part of ourselves. And I find that that's where the true integration is in this work. That's where the true healing is, in these moments that, you know, the body, we don't even hardly notice it the breath is just balanced, the mind is quiet, we're just observing ourselves, and we're connecting to something greater outside of ourselves. This is the integration. This is what helps, I find, clients to feel really whole again after feeling really challenged and struggling for many years. Okay, so let's move a little bit more into just kind of defining trauma so that we're all on the same page this evening. These are just some simple definitions that I give to my clients when they're asking what trauma is. So the most simple one I find is just that it's too much experience too suddenly. So too much experience too suddenly, which overwhelms one's ability to cope. Trauma is also a disruption of flow. So flow is a state of moving through life with ease and grace, being connected to the things around you, and suddenly, bam, something happens and it takes you out of this sense of flow and kind of shocks you. Trauma is also a phenomenon that lives in the body via the central nervous system. So I was at TK and I was running a trauma group with some adolescent girls, and I asked them this question: what is trauma? How are we defining trauma? Let's make a working definition for all of us to use during this group time. And this is what they came up with, and I thought that it was really cool. What they came up with together as a group, without any prompting from me, was that it's a really bad experience that lives in the back of your mind and makes you do unhealthy things to try and forget about it. Right? So they kind of hit the nail right on the head, and even by saying that lives in the back of your mind, I felt was just really insightful and interesting. As we move on, we'll talk about that more in a moment. So what is the prevalence of PTSD and eating disorder as a co-occurring disorder? According to NIDA, about 30% of individuals with eating disorders are also survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Okay, so that's about 1 in 3 clients that you might be seeing that's struggling with eating disorder has also survived childhood sexual abuse. This leads to body shame. So intense feelings of body shame, intense feelings of critical judgment towards the body, which leads to ED behaviors as a coping mechanism, similar to our clients who use self-harm as a coping mechanism. ED is a way to shift our awareness out of traumatic thought, traumatic memory, and emotion. We can, engage in a binge and purge cycle that helps us to kind of disconnect. And, many times trauma survivors need that outlet. They need to be able to get out of the intensity of the trauma memories. And they find a way to do so using their body, using food. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit now about how trauma really impacts the brain. This is an image called the triune brain, and it's one of the most simple brain images that you'll ever see. It just divides a simple egg shape into 3 parts, which represents 3 different parts of our brain. And we'll start at the back of the brain. And when I'm teaching this to clients, I like for them to use some tactile sensation. So if you want to, you can try this and just take your hands sort of right back to the very back of the brain, the back of the head, where your head kind of connects down into your neck and your spine, and just kind of give it a tap or a tickle, give it some sensation there. This is your reptilian brain. This is the oldest part of the brain. It starts to develop in utero, and the reptilian brain is what's governing your sensations, your impulses, your nervous system, heart rate, breathing, and temperature. Okay, so reptilian brain is anything that is instinctually happening in your body that you don't have to think about. You don't have to make happen. The middle of the brain, if you would like to join me in taking your hands just kind of up into the skull and just giving it a little scratch or a little tap or tingle so you get some sensation there. This is your limbic system. This is where your emotions live, your memories live there, and your attachment style and structure, how you relate to other people. And then the frontal cortex. If you could take your fingertips right onto your forehead and just give it a little tap or tingle so that you get some sensation there. This is your cognition, logical reasoning, body regulation, intuition, and observation, your ability to observe. Okay, so when we got to that fourth kosha of notice how you just know how to feel the body, notice how you just know how to watch the breath. This is happening because of the prefrontal cortex. The issue that happens with trauma, particularly with complex trauma, is that the frontal cortex often has a very difficult time coming online or activating. This happens because when we get triggered or when we feel freaked out by something or a trauma memory shows up, whether we know it or not, right? Because trauma memories can be both implicit or explicit. Our reptilian brain starts to fire once we get a message from the amygdala. The amygdala is represented by this big kind of splat star in the middle of the image. The amygdala, Bessel van der Kolk calls it the smoke detector. So the amygdala detects something. It detects a trigger is near you and sends a message to the reptilian brain that it's time to go into fight, flight, freeze, or submit. Okay, so our heart might start beating really fast, our muscles might get really tense, or we start to sweat, our legs start to shake, or we just kind of feel ourselves shutting down. Typically what happens is that one and then the other pretty quickly. So we might go into fight or flight and then maybe drop into submit or freeze. So when the amygdala is firing and the reptilian brain and the body are kind of going haywire, really getting active, the frontal cortex shuts off, shuts down. So if you notice here what the frontal cortex does, regulates the body and observes, uses logical reasoning, none of that is really available to use. Okay? Which is what is really, really wonderful about yoga, about the yoga practice, is the entire thing is really a workout for your frontal cortex. Okay? Because in every moment, a good yoga teacher or a good yoga therapist is going to be asking you to stay very present to what you're feeling. Just notice all these different parts of the body placed in different positions, and by you doing that, it helps the frontal cortex to stay on because you're observing your experience inside out. So this image here, this is not how the brain actually looks, right? The brain actually looks a little bit more like this, that there are these layers. There's a reptilian inside of the limbic system, inside of the outer cortex. And I just think it's pretty cool that this image looks really, really, really similar to this image, right? Except for these yogis were like meditating back in caves thousands of years ago and developing this system that modern science came to discover, only within the last couple of hundred years. Right, so we have this Kosha model just happening inside of our brain. The only difference here is that we might add a little layer between reptilian and limbic in this system and call that the breath. And then we might add another layer outside the cortex and, call that kind of our higher awareness, our higher thinking. All right. So what does the Kosha model, these layers of our being, how are these impacted in a trauma survivor who's really struggling with eating disorder symptoms or using eating disorder symptoms to cope? What's happening is the body, I've got this in bright red here because typically the body is kind of, for many people, like a, it's not a safe place. It feels overly sensational, so it's too much for them to handle. Heart rate is constantly increased. They're tense. And so the body almost, becomes like does become a very, very unsafe space to exist and to be. The awareness of breath is often not even a thing, right? Not even a thing that's online, is if they're aware if they're breathing or not. The mind and the emotions are typically all over the place, pretty out of control, overthinking, lots of ruminating. The witness, not really on, kind of grayed out. And then this higher self, is also not simple to connect with. If you're really aware that your body feels pretty out of control all the time, and then you're not breathing and your mind is just spinning because of triggers, trauma triggers, or eating disorder behavior, you're not going to connect to these higher parts of yourself very often. Okay, so for someone who's really struggling with eating disorder symptoms, who's has a history of trauma, what happens in the layer of the body is that a lot of shame. A lot of shame is leading them continuously to habits of restricting, purging, and binging. What happens in the layer of the breath is that there's often a chronic holding or a shallowing of the breath that over time is creating a cyclical effect of dysregulation. So they're feeling dysregulated or they're feeling triggered, their breath gets held, which then makes them feel even more triggered in their body, and on and on and on. In the layer of the mind and the emotions, this is where they're using binging and purging behaviors to really reduce awareness of painful thoughts and emotions. The observing mind, cycles of intense emotions and sensation reduces the effectiveness of the observing mind. We talked about that. And then self, there's a disconnection from source or higher power. All right, so yoga comes in here. So you see this image of a carriage and its horses. There is a story, a very old story within the yogic tradition of a cart and its horses, but it's not the cart that you see pictured here. So I want you to change this image in your mind a little bit. The cart in this story is broken down. So imagine some spokes falling off the wheels, a door hanging from its hinges, the windows broken out. This broken down old cart is being driven by horses that are totally out of control. They haven't been trained, they're not good at wearing the harnesses, they're walking in two opposite directions, they're being stubborn. And these horses are being managed by a driver who is not paying any attention. He's totally distracted. Inside of this carriage is the owner of the whole thing, and she is a queen who has fallen asleep. So within this yogic story of the horse and the carriage represents our body, broken down, in pain, sore. The horses represent our emotions, all over the place, wild. The driver represents the observing mind, just kind of not there, not really paying too much attention. The queen in the back who's asleep, she represents our soul. So the story of the horse and the carriage is that through yoga, through a dedicated yoga practice, we can fix up our carriage. We can heal our body. We can get out of being in pain all the time, so that we can then work to regulate our emotional mind. And then we can activate our observer. We can become aware. We can become focused. And through all of these things, eventually our soul awakens. We reconnect to our deeper parts. So how does this work? How yoga transforms trauma symptoms? We're going to look at 5 different ways. It increases interoception, increases tolerance of sensations, emotions, memories, and relationships, disrupts implicit postures, the implicit way that we hold our body. It invites breath orientation as present moment awareness, and uses empowerment through choice. So let's dig into each of these a little more. Interoception. Interoception is our capacity to feel and sense the body's experience. This is an information channel used to represent one's body from within. Okay, so similar to a word that many people have heard, proprioception, which is how our body knows kind of where we are in space and how we know not to run into things. So if I'm walking through a room and there's a chair in the middle of the room, my body can sense that. My muscles know how to activate so that I shift a little bit to the right and move around the chair. right? Interoception is similar, but it's all inside of the body. It's our ability to feel our feet on the ground. It's our ability to feel that we're hungry. It's our ability to feel that the heart rate has started to increase or that the shoulders have just gotten really tight. Research is finding that clients who have survived trauma, as well as clients who are struggling with eating disorders, both have a very diminished capacity of interoception. So it's very difficult for them to feel their body, right? And so for trauma survivors, that happened a lot of times because of dissociation at the time of the trauma, because what they were feeling was too painful. And so their brain could do this awesome thing called dissociate and not have to feel it. And so that over and over disconnects our ability to feel into our own sense of being. We can engage interoception in our clients by helping to guide them towards mindful awareness within each posture, right? Each yoga posture or each moment, each breath. So this is really kind of a baseline for how we want to help our clients recover from trauma and eating disorder, is to connect them to their body, to let them feel their body from within, to feel their hunger cues, to feel that they're getting really tense. You know, oftentimes I have found that clients know that they're on the verge of using a behavior once they've already kind of reached 90 to 100 on the scale. And through working together and helping to build interoception, you know, you can start to contact and regulate those things when you're at a 5, a 10, a 20, a 30 on the scale leading up to using behaviors. But if you can't feel that your shoulders have gotten tight, if you can't feel that your jaw has started to clench and that your heart's been beating really fast all day, you suddenly just think, oh my gosh, I feel pretty crappy, and you do what you need to do to not feel crappy anymore, right? Using your behaviors. So yoga really helps to increase tolerance of sensations, emotions, memories, relationships. This is a model that many of you may have seen before, the window of tolerance. And this is a really lovely model to use with your clients. So you can draw this out in your office. You can have a whiteboard and draw it out. You can get out a piece of paper, have them draw it out, and use plot points to go throughout their week to see, you know, where they were in their window of tolerance when different triggers or issues were happening for them. All right, so these two black heavy lines that are running parallel to each other represent the edges of the window. The dark black softly wavy line represents our stress response. Right? So our stress response at times moves up towards the upper part of the window, which in the upper part of the window lives hyperarousal, fight, flight, or freeze. Right? We all feel these at times. We all feel anxiety at times. We all feel tense, or our heart starts to beat a little faster. But many of us can also regulate it and stay within our window. We all have times where we move towards hypoarousal. We get a little down, depressed, sluggish, maybe a little disconnected or dissociated. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't tolerate that and that we can find balance within ourselves. This thin black, very pointy line is representing the nervous system, the stress response of someone who is recovering from trauma, someone who is dealing with trauma triggers. Right? So they're often outside of their window. And a lot of times what happens is that they spike up into hyperarousal and then eventually drop down into hypo, right? Or dissociate in some way or submit. The yogic language for these three regions of the window of tolerance, Rajas, Sattva, Tamas, which you can see over at the right. Rajas is related to the fire element. So Rajas has a lot of energy to it. It's very hyper-aroused. Tamas is related to earth energy. So it's dense, heavy, sluggish, doesn't move much. Sattva is what exists right in the center. It's peaceful, present. And all three of these parts have their place. Right? We need sometimes to move into fight or flight. We need that fire element. We need Rajas. It's not that we want to create a life where there's no Rajas, there's no fire, right? Because then what happens if, you know, suddenly a dog chases us and we have to run down the street really fast? We need tamas. We need to be able to calm down and to just sit. Tamas helps us sleep. But an overabundance of tamas makes it really, really hard to get out of bed and go to work each day. Right? So we need all three parts of these, and we want to work towards helping our clients really find this place of sattva within themselves. Yoga can help them widen their window of tolerance by building resilience to sensations. Right? And that's what we want. We want to increase interoception by building tolerance or building resilience to sensation in the body. All right, so check out these two images here, two very different yoga postures. The woman on the left, who's all wrapped up into this crazy pretzel-like position, I would guess that please do not take this as a representation of yoga therapy. Yoga therapy is many times very, very gentle. But I put this image in here because I would guess that she has a pretty wide window of tolerance to sensation, right? I would guess she's might be kind of feeling a lot in her hips and in her knee and in her foot. It's probably really difficult to breathe. And so, yogis are often shown, we've got this image of the very peaceful, calm, present, can kind of sit in meditation through anything, and that's because the yoga practice is sometimes inherently uncomfortable. We sometimes inherently want to move ourselves towards positions that really help us to build resilience to discomfort. And I added this image because that's kind of what that represents to me. Now, the woman on the right, who's doing a simple seated posture with a little bit of a side bend, her one arm is up in the sky, for her, that might be widening that window of tolerance. I've worked with many women recovering from trauma who even just raising their arm up in the sky is a very triggering thing because it means that they can feel the muscles in their arm, or it opens the vulnerable side of the body, opens the vulnerable stomach. And so each of these represents a woman in a different level of her window of tolerance. We have to constantly be assessing on how far to push or how much to back off. I think that many times within yoga, if we don't push enough, we invite clients to constantly stay within their comfort zone. And when you're constantly in your comfort zone, your edges of your window do not grow. And you don't build the resilience that you might need. On the other hand, there's some people that don't even know what a comfort zone is. They don't feel comfort ever, and so we really want to help them to just feel comfortable, right? So this practice is never prescriptive. Everyone is completely different, and that's why yoga therapy or yoga psychotherapy is such a wonderful addition to a therapeutic practice, because you can really tailor it to this person sitting in front of you. All right, so the next way that yoga really helps to transform trauma symptoms is by looking at our implicit postures, by disrupting our implicit postures. And what I mean by this is these ways that we hold our body as we move throughout life that we aren't quite aware of. We can become more aware of them through a mindfulness practice or through yoga, but oftentimes we have these certain ways of being, these certain ways of showing up. Whether it's very, very slight lift of the shoulders around a certain type of person, or up to the image that you see here on this slide of the women or men who kind of constantly have their knees tucked up to their chest and their head dropped a little bit, protecting the front of the body. This is very much like kind of a fight or flight sort of position, or a freeze sort of position. And so yoga really helps us to become aware of, oh, my body's doing that thing again, or, oh, my jaw just really clenched when I heard someone say that word. Okay, let me try something different. So I found this quote by Alexander Lowen, which I really love. He says that many people are laboring under great stress, yet they feel that if they fail to carry on, this would admit to weakness, to defeat, and to their failure as human beings. In this desperate strait, they set their jaws more firmly, stiffen their legs, lock their knees, and struggle on. Right? So this unawareness, really, this disconnection from the tension that we hold in our body due to the circumstances that we live through life, due to the way that we're trying to hold back our emotions from truly processing themselves, become how we hold ourselves. How do we change implicit postures? Is yoga engages us in 5 movements of the spine. This is another really special thing about a yoga practice as opposed to any other just kind of a general, like a workout or many other movement practices, is that yoga really focuses on including the 5 movements of the spine within each balanced practice. The 5 movements of the spine are spinal flexion, so folding forward, spinal extension, back bending. Spinal lateral flexion is bending over to the side. Spinal rotation is a twist. And then spinal axial extension, which is weight bearing, finding a lot of length through your spine. Many of us live most of our lives, probably 90% of our time, in a forward moving position. We're only moving in one plane. And so all of a sudden we start to do all of these yoga postures that move us into different planes of being, that move our spine into different ways, and then we get more choice. And when we have more choice, we have the ability to regulate. Okay, so the next way in which yoga helps to transform symptoms of trauma for people struggling with eating disorders is definitely the breath. The breath is absolutely the foundation of yoga. This is a simple way to engage the frontal cortex, and it is an anchor to the present moment that is always available. So we're always breathing, whether we're noticing it or not. So our breathing is this really cool thing that can be both voluntary or involuntary. For most of us, all the time, it's involuntary. But if you take a moment and really just feel how you're breathing, like I asked you to a few minutes ago at the start of this presentation, that alone, to watch the breath, will help to turn on, to engage the frontal cortex. So there you go. Breathing will help to regulate you by calming you down, because fight or flight breathing is like holding the breath or shallowing the breath because you're preparing to have to use a lot of energy. And so in those moments when the fight or flight thing starts to kind of turn on, to take a deeper inhale and a longer exhale, and to really watch that happen, to watch the chest rise and fall, or more subtly to feel the breath moving up through the nostrils and back out through the nostrils, engages the frontal cortex. You turn on the observing mind, and it calms down the nervous system over time. Marina Abramovic said, "To control the breathing is to control the mind." With different patterns of breathing, you can fall in love, you can hate someone, you can feel the whole spectrum of feelings just by changing your breathing. In yoga, breath is referred to as prana, and prana literally just means our vital life force. Vital life force. It keeps us alive, it keeps us vital. It balances our mood and our nervous system, and it focuses our mind. Okay, so let's try a bit of an experiential here with your own breath. So again, wherever you are, I want you to just kind of, I know you're probably very much in your head right now, learning all this information, listening, watching the slides, but I just want you to shift out of that kind of cognitive heady place for a minute and come back into feeling your body. Particularly your breathing. So just come back to noticing the breath. And don't change anything about how you're breathing just yet, but just notice how you breathe. And then here, I'm going to ask that you do change your breathing in any way. So I want you to take the next few moments and either breathe deeper and slower, or maybe try breathing more short and more shallow. Maybe you try breathing really choppy, or you try holding the breath at different moments. But for the next couple of moments, just try to change your breathing in any way. And as you change your breathing, notice what happens in your mind. Notice what happens in your body. Any different feelings that might come up, emotions. And then do it again. Change your breathing in a different way one more time. So again, maybe you try deeper breaths, maybe you try more shallow breaths. Maybe you make your breath purposely choppy. Maybe you hold the breath at certain moments. So just change your breath again in a different way one more time. Try it like that for a few rounds. And again, as you try this, notice the impact that it makes on your body. Notice how it affects your mind. If there's any emotions that might start to show up. And then just take a deeper inhale, a longer exhale, and maybe if that was a little challenging for you or if it made you feel in a way that didn't feel so good, just shake it out a little bit. Roll out your shoulders or roll out your head. Come back to your natural breath. Okay, so what you might have experienced there is that different parts of our breath have different qualities to it. Our inhale really helps us to increase prana. Remember, prana is our vital life force. So if we take a deep breath in and hold it in for a minute and really feel that expansion of the chest, the expansion of the ribs, the heart really kind of starts to come alive. This increases your energy. This adds feelings of energy and vitality to the body and the mind. In yoga, the language for this practice is called Brahmana. So any breathing practice or movement practice that increases energy. Balances the effects of hypoarousal. This is really good for people that are having a day where they're kind of down and they're kind of sluggish. And I show here a few different postures that might help to increase prana. So this first one is just hands to the sky, upward facing hands. You can lift up. That'll help to get some lift in the rib cage. It gives the rib cage more room to take in more breath. Any of the back bending. Here you're seeing a cobra pose, the guy in the middle. And the side bending. Again, this creates more space in the ribs to really breathe, gives a stretch to the intercostal muscles, which over time will make the breath a little more mature, a little richer. Okay, on the other side, decreasing prana. This practice is referred to in the yogic language, Sanskrit, as longana. This helps us to balance the effects of hyperarousal. So if you think about this, this is like a long, slow exhale. Maybe some of you tried that while you were experimenting with your breath, where you can just try it now. Just a very long, slow exhale, just kind of letting out the steam, letting out the tension. This really helps to invite feelings of relaxation and softening within the body and the mind. And I find, from the years that I've worked with trauma survivors, is that this is what more people need. So research shows that about 70% of people really struggle with hyperarousal symptoms, anxiety, panic, fear, and about 30% are in hypoarousal. So being able to learn how to decrease prana, how to relax your body is really, really important. And here are just a few examples of postures that help to do that. And I really wanted to use different ways of doing these. So a couple of these are really restorative. You'll see that a couple of these people have a lot of props around them, a lot of props supporting their body. This practice is usually called Restorative Yoga. And it looks at just passively stretching, letting your body be held and supported by props around you so that you can totally let the muscles go. Okay, there's a child's pose up at the top that's not supported. It's just a regular child's pose. And then there's legs up the wall over to the left at the bottom. This is often a really good posture that many people recovering from trauma really enjoy. I have found many of the people that I've worked with, this helps them to feel safer. And this just physiologically is really, really good for the body. It's really good for the heart. What this actually is a very, very modified version of a headstand. So if you've seen people in a headstand or if you've done headstands yourself, this is a very modified version of it in that it gives you the same kind of circulation benefits as well as nervous system benefits, relaxing. And then over at the right is a woman seated in a chair and folded forward. Right, so you can do this in your office. Your clients can do this in your office. This doesn't have to be complicated. You can just sit in a chair, fold forward, let the head go, let the jaw relax, and take a few inhales with really, really long exhales. This is going to help you, invite you into a Langana practice, relaxing, softening, letting out the steam and the tension. Right. So another way that yoga really helps to transform symptoms of trauma is that it creates a sense of empowerment by providing choice. Judith Herman says, the core experiences of psychological trauma are disempowerment and disconnection from others. Recovery, therefore, is based upon the empowerment of the survivor and the creation of new connections. Recovery can take place only in the context of relationships. It cannot occur in isolation. Right, so it becomes a very important, very sacred connection between the therapist and the client when the therapist offers a person choice again, a person who choice was most likely taken away from them one or many times. So a therapeutic approach to empowerment is to always, on the end of the clinician, be kind of seeing through this lens of unity and collaboration. That we aren't making decisions for our clients, we're making decisions with our clients. We are not ahead of our clients, pulling them along. We are walking alongside them on a path towards healing and wholeness. Cole, I love this. This is another just kind of lens that I see through, is curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. And this is one of Dan Siegel's acronyms. He has a lot of really great acronyms. Cole, curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. This is how I show up to my clients, how I am present in the room. That no matter how they're presenting, no matter what they might be telling me or what's happened in their life, I am open, accepting, and loving. I use an experimental attitude, and I provide options and choice. We'll look at those more. An experimental attitude is just a simple change in your language. So I wonder what might happen if. Maybe we could see what happens if you try. And then notice what happens when you try. By using experimental attitude in your language, it doesn't really say that one thing or the other has to happen. Experiment is just an experiment. There's no failing an experiment, right? So instead of a language that says, lift your right arm up to the sky, sit up taller, and fold to the side, right? That is very kind of demanding, which isn't always wrong. But just try changing it up a little bit to, I wonder what it might feel like for you to raise your right arm up to the sky. And then now that your right arm is raised up, maybe we could just see what happens if you try sitting up a little taller, or maybe even bending to the side a little bit. Just kind of notice what happens as you try these little movements in your body. Right? So it's invitational, it's softer, it gives them a choice to say, no, I don't want to do that. And then you go, cool. And then that's more information for you to work with. And then finally, provide options. Providing options in how they can move or how they can breathe offers an opportunity to make a choice. It engages clients in reflection on what is best for them in any moment. Empowerment over time. Empowerment is created over time by allowing clients to establish new beliefs. This is my body. I can choose what is best for me. And I have a choice to stay with this sensation or to shift it, right? So providing options and experimental language kind of go hand in hand. So I wonder what might happen if you raise your right arm up to the sky. And then if you want, we can take a couple breaths here with the arm just raised up, or, you know, maybe you try bending over to the left a little bit. Just whichever one feels right for you. Okay. And I find that a lot of times for the people who are truly, truly disconnected from their body, options don't work real well because they don't know what to do because they've never done it. So providing options, your options can get more and more interesting, a little more complicated, the more that you work with someone and the more aware in their body that they are, because then they'll start to know what to do. So you could provide 3 or 4 options and they could choose. 3 or 4 options right at the beginning of this work is probably going to be a little overwhelming. So using options and experimental attitude to really let the clients make their own choices. And I also just want to add that all of this is for you to do as well. So if you're interested in starting to engage more with yoga in your clinical office with your clients, you have to be in your practice. You have to be doing this on your own. We cannot guide each other into a place of presence and mindfulness without our own relationship to it. Okay? We cannot guide someone else into mindfulness and into true presence without our own relationship to it. Science is finding that. Our right brain to right brain attunement. So if we as the clinician are present and mindful, aware in our own body, just that is going to help to bring our client into the same state over time. So I've included here a link for this lovely little blog that I found that has, I think, a 10-minute, it's maybe 5 or less chair postures for you to try. And I used chair postures because I find that it's more likely that people will do it the simpler it is. So if you don't have a yoga mat, it does not matter. You don't need a yoga mat to do yoga. You don't need certain brand of yoga pants to do yoga. All you need is you and your body. So I encourage you to start trying some of these things in your office between clients so that you can get really aware of it, and then you can help to guide your clients. You know, you can use these postures that are on this blog to give it a start and to give it a go and then build from there. Okay. That is the end of my portion of the presentation. Namaste, which means the light in me bows to the light in you. Thank you all for hanging out online tonight. This is pretty cool. And I think that Crystal's going to check in with some of the questions that you guys have written.
Yes, and thank you so much, Rachel, for your excellent and very informative presentation on this really interesting topic. And we just appreciate your time and sharing your insight and your knowledge.
Oh, you're welcome.
And just for all our attendees that are still with us for tonight, just to bring to your attention, in the chat box of your control panel, there is a link that will lead you to the program evaluation form. So if you want to click on that, and you can go to the automated form that you can fill out and submit in order to get your CE credit for the presentation this evening. And we will be transitioning into some Q&A. And Rachel, one of the first questions we received from Megan is asking, what is your go-to approach in easing a client into trying yoga psychotherapy, i.e. explaining how a body can hold trauma and how yoga can help with the healing process?
What's the language that I use for that conversation?
I think so. She's asking, what is your go-to approach?
Yeah, so that's a really good question because a lot of times people do come and they might know that yes, absolutely, I have yoga in my title, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily are ready for it or want to do it. And so I really explain to them the Kosha model. I don't call it that. So many times when I'm working with clients, I don't use any of the yoga language. It's just a little too much too soon, I find. So I just sort of explain that, we've got all these different parts of ourselves, and a lot of times we live just up in our head. We just live up in this tiny little thing in our head, our brain, and that place can get us into a lot of trouble. And so if we can start to shift into awareness of other parts, so we can start to become aware of our body and maybe learn how to move our body a little bit different, or how to use our body in such a way that it really becomes a resource for us. It becomes our helper rather than something that we should be fighting against. and that the work, I always explain the work is not easy. It's not always going to feel good. Um, but a lot of times it will, and over time and dedication, it can really, really transform how you move through the world and how you interact with others, how you see yourself. So I really, there's definitely a buy-in that has to happen with a lot of people because they're a little freaked out by it. They're a little scared of it, and that makes sense. So just really explaining the Kosha model without calling it the Kosha model, and encouraging them to give it a shot and to let them know that they're in control. That I'm not going to have you do anything that you don't want to do. You're allowed to say no at any moment.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Another question from Rachel is asking, can you expand on the submit response? How is that different than freeze?
So freeze is the way that I make sense of freeze is that it feels like if you were sitting in a car and you were to push your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time, the car would be revving up, the engine would be revving up, but it wouldn't go anywhere. This is freeze. Freeze in clients kind of looks like a deer in headlights. It's a big inhale that never has a following exhale. Eyes are often very large, and there's little to no movement in the body. Submit, on the other hand, is a part of our nervous system that has kind of gone into like the dorsal vagal mode, meaning like if you think about animals and how animals react when they're freaked out, there's many animals who go into sort of like this feigned death, or they just kind of lay down and collapse in order to save themselves from a larger predator. And it's this just complete collapse, no awareness, no real connection, but also no inner activation necessarily. It's just kind of like, okay, yeah, go for it, do it, whatever. Right? And we see submit, I think, in our offices a lot, and we don't necessarily catch on to it submit. And I didn't say this earlier, but if we're working with this model of the window of tolerance, we don't want to be working outside of the window. We push the edges of the window, but if they jump outside of the window, either above or below, then we back off and we regulate. So submit might be looking like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll try it. And so you're hearing these words of, yes, I'll try it, but your micro awareness or your micro tracking is seeing that she's moving into not being able to say no. She's just submissive in that moment. Then you back off and you re-regulate. Okay, so freeze is revved up, can't move. Submit is more of a collapse, yeah, whatever, kind of giving up.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. Um, okay, let's see. Another question for you. As a dietitian teaching those with eating disorders, I'm working with a digestive system that is healing. Are there specific poses, breath patterns, or frequency of eating even foods that can regulate a healing gut?
I can't really speak to the certain foods, but I would say this practice, especially anything that's helping to engage that lungana practice, so the relaxation, the softening, is really, really good for the gut. Because stress, as we all know, really is affecting our digestion and our gut. And so helping to relax the stress with a deeper breathing with the really long exhales is really good for that. Dynamic forward folds can be really good, meaning, let's say, like tabletop position, so somebody on their hands and their knees, and then slowly shifting back into a child's pose. And then coming back up to the hands and the knees on an inhale, and shifting back into a child's pose on the exhale. That's what I mean by that. Helps to very gently sort of create this compression in the digestive system that helps to get things moving and helps to get things going. When I've worked with women that have eating disorders, they often have all kinds of different symptoms of either constipation or irritable bowels as they're healing their gut. And so these really soft, gentle movements that just gently compress the belly a few times can be really beneficial for that.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Michelle is wondering, what are some techniques you recommend for individuals with chronic pain? I encourage them to do chair yoga, but some patients are still resistant or have too much pain.
Chair yoga and the restorative postures are really, really good for chronic pain. I have seen quite a few people who have really healed and managed their chronic pain, gotten off of, their huge prescription of meds through using especially a restorative or a yin yoga practice. So you want to be looking for things called restorative yoga or yin yoga. They're very passive, they're very soft and slow. You're not going to get into any kind of intense postures. It's really just to kind of help the fascial tissue release and to help us breathe a little bit slower. So chair yoga, but also the restorative postures, because chair yoga doesn't always mean restorative. Chair yoga is modified yoga, which is really wonderful, but it might not feel restorative. So look into, just Google some restorative postures that you can try.
Great, thank you. Candace is wondering if you could clarify about the Kosha model, or she's wondering how you spell it so she can look into it more.
It's Kosha.
Perfect, thank you. Just another question, or one of our attendees is wondering how, or what was your background and schooling that you did in order to become like a yoga therapist for eating disorder patients?
So I feel like I need to clarify that yoga therapy is really this amazing field that is becoming very quickly accredited towards its own body of accreditation and licensing. I am not accredited as a yoga therapist. What I practice is yoga-informed psychotherapy. Yoga therapy traditionally treats many, many things, but they're really excellent at treating, more physical issues, more physiological issues. And I find that yoga-informed psychotherapy or yoga psychology really does a great job at touching into the activity of the mind, which is really what we're looking at here when we're treating trauma and eating disorders. And so my background is that I have practiced yoga for many, many years, and then I decided to go to grad school for counseling, just kind of a general counseling degree. And as I was in grad school for counseling, I was, at that time really experiencing a lot of my own inner transformation through my yoga practice. A lot of things were happening on my yoga mat that were really changing my life and how I saw myself and how I related to my body. And what I found in my general counseling degree is that they weren't speaking to the body or to movement or to breathing at all. And so at this time I started a very in-depth teacher training program, a 200-hour teacher training program, to bring together, to kind of fill the holes, really, the holes that I felt like were missing in my counseling program, to be able to speak about the body, to move the body, to teach people how to move the body. From there, I then, many years later after getting my graduate degree, I started a program called Sensory Motor Psychotherapy, and I am still currently in that. That's a 3-year program that I am in the second year of, and that's a really, really lovely method of learning about the nervous system, learning about the brain, and that I feel like has really brought all the pieces together for me to be able to work with this as a really solid skill set.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And just one last question for you, Rachel. One of our attendees is wondering, is the submit response related to a form of disassociation? Or dissociation, I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah. Submit and dissociation can look really similar, or people in dissociation can definitely be showing signs of submission as well, as can freeze. So yes, they're connected.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And that concludes our Q&A session as well as our webinar presentation this evening. Rachel, thank you so much again just for your time and for preparing such an informative webinar for us and for our attendees this evening.
You're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Thank you. And do you mind quickly just sharing the website information for TK, for Timberline Knolls, for anyone interested?
Sure. Yeah, it's just timberlineknolls.com. And they can go on there and check out any of the different modalities that we treat and how Timberline Knolls treats them, see pictures of the beautiful campus.
Wonderful. Thank you. And for any of our attendees that are still on and having questions about the form, if you look in the chat box of your control panel, you will see a link in there that will direct you to the program evaluation form that you can fill out online and submit. And we will be collecting those and emailing out your certificate of completion for the CE credit. So on that note, thank you so much to all of our attendees and again to Rachel for being here for our presentation in collaboration with Timberline Knolls. And please feel free to visit us at eatingdisorderhope.com for more information about our upcoming webinars. And if you do have any questions that you would like to submit or ask, please feel free to email us at info@eatingdisorderhope.com. Thank you again for your time, and we hope to see you again on another webinar soon. Have a great evening.
Thank you.